Good afternoon, good evening to all the friends of Punto a Capo. Here we are with a new episode. Today is April 22nd, 2026, and we are analyzing some events we saw happen today. The first, which is extremely irritating, just for a change, is the confirmation of the famous loan of 90 billion loan, let's say money given to Ukraine for 90 billion, which the European community has decided to grant. Money from our pockets, money given in a situation where perhaps with the big energy crisis that European nations are undergoing, it would have been better to keep it at home and maybe take a moment to study systems to be more self-sufficient. And what has been added to this? An additional package, the 20th package of sanctions against Russia. These are some of the paradoxical situations we are seeing emerge. We have a critical situation concerning the possibility of supplies, and at the same time, we see sanctions being imposed on Russia. However, at the same time, we also see that there are countries that have imported 145% more products from Russia, despite these well-known sanctions, other European countries that can. And naturally, we, with the Italian government, we Italians extremely compliant with those sacred European principles that are proclaimed but not respected by many. Well, we adhere, and consequently, we have the usual problems. In light of this discussion, of this unblocking that has occurred, and we know it was made possible thanks to the ousting of Orban in Hungary, for which this veto was lifted, and then magically with this type of veto being lifted and the new government having requested that something around 20 billion be unblocked, investments, practically of contribution given by the European community to Hungary. Hungary says, but then I have set as a principle that of these 90 billion, I will not give even a cent. And in the meantime, I go and take my 20 billion, you see, which had been blocked. So for the rest, let all the European countries manage on their own, and those who can't manage in different ways. We have seen this new president who was elected, named Magyar, replacing Orban, who was supposed to be a European person accommodating with Europe. And we have seen that he indeed immediately accommodated with Europe, managing to bring home those subsidies from the European side that were blocked. And at the same time, he went there saying, okay, should put here, this 90 billion that all European states pay, including Italy, of this fake loan money, well, I authorize it, I don't veto it, and so on. The situation is quite serious. It is quite serious because we are seeing a general discussion. Today, there was also the Minister of Budget, Giorgetti, who gave an overview of how we are as a country. He says, well, yes, we actually thought we had quite a significant deficit. Here, we are still in the area of infringement, so of penalty from the European community, because we have not returned below the 3% deficit, but we are at 3.1, so a 3.4 was even expected because we didn't know if we could make it. We have returned. What does it actually mean? It means that this year there will be a further need to cut. And guess a bit where these gentlemen will make cuts. Given that they do not want to look bad in front of their international partners, there is a commitment to invest in weapons. Naturally, we are talking about American weapons, German weapons, and consequently, who will have to tighten their belts to those that are the services we provide to the Italian people. First of all, we have seen how easily they enjoy cutting the supports to the healthcare system, but there are also other discussions that we have seen clash a bit. First of all, we were told that there are still 40 billion of this debt due to the famous 110, and there will be about 20, if I'm not mistaken, also next year. Consequently, a debt that has heavily weighed on the pockets of all Italians.
And then there's another thing that practically concerns immigration.
You know that in these hours, attention has been drawn to the new security decree, where even the scandal of scandals emerged, so much so that even the president of the republic intervened on the fact of lawyers trying to induce certain illegal immigrants, in quotes, or those with some legal issues to return to their country. And there would have been a contribution of 600, 700 euros that would have been given to the lawyers. When has there ever been such a total rebellion because it was something unjust, unconstitutional? Well, do we want to remember how much this free legal aid for immigrants costs? I mean, someone arrives and basically says, no, I oppose, no, I don't want to go home, then no, you have to leave, no, I'm not leaving. And then immediately legal aid is provided, meaning a lawyer is made available, an attorney that all Italian citizens pay for. Well, then, this legal aid for 2021 to 2022 was counted as something like 400 million. And then, of course, if there are problems, naturally there are appeals, right? Immediately made to the prefectural commissions. Only the issue of the prefectural commissions cost 71 million. Now, with issues of this kind that we are seeing, affecting Italians, but it's not to make a slogan, because by now Italians need more than creams on their skin. And not only Italians, I think there are also other countries in this condition at the moment. For example, I'm talking about Germany. The cost of this uncontrolled immigration that has arrived, especially those who came thanks to protective regulation for refugees from countries where there was war or no war. Here we are seeing what happened with Prime Minister Merz, who tried to send back to Syria this almost 1 million Syrians, saying, look, you can return to your homes because today there is no war situation. There is a situation of stability. Even the Syrians at this time, there has been this, as if to say, the release of an American base that was strategic. So everything is returning to normal for a sovereign state that is managing on its own. This base was the Kusrak base. It was a rather important and strategic American base, and it has been returned. So, in fact, there is a normalization. We are seeing that the Syrian Prime Minister Giuliani is being received everywhere. Naturally, there was once a bounty because he was an ISIS leader and was considered a criminal. This, by having him put on this jacket and tie, he has in fact become a statesman accepted in the finest circles, and accepted, as we have seen, even by President Trump, who received him with full honors at the White House. So there is stability. We have managed to bring peace, not so much democracy, because by now talking about democracy in those states seems more like blasphemy in church than anything else. So there, going back to the German government, Merz tried to say, now you have to take them back. The comment made by this Syrian prime minister was extremely clear, saying, no, look, I absolutely cannot take back these citizens of my country, as it would cause destabilization and not, I know how it might end, but if you are willing to invest and create jobs, to create new structures, to create new things here in Syria, then we can start talking about it. Some time ago, we saw a somewhat more decisive action when criminals who were in Germany, Afghan Taliban, were captured and practically sent back to Afghanistan. Well, we are not actually seeing this behavior with the Syrian issue. So we are seeing that there is an attempt to, but at the same time, the need to send back home citizens who had arrived under the concept of countries at war, problems of this type, we see that they need to be considered a bit differently, right? We have seen, still talking about Mr. Merz, what he has done. He says he made an agreement with Mr. Zelensky and says, wait a moment, I'll send you to Ukraine. If you agree, we organize and you take back all those who had fled from Ukraine of conscription age because they did not want to serve in the military and fight heroically for their own people. So there too a discussion is being triggered about targeted expulsions practically directed from Berlin or Munich to the front to fight and die in Ukraine. These are the somewhat paradoxical things we are seeing in this period. Other extremely paradoxical things we are seeing is this situation, this Iranian situation of you block me, I block you too. No, in fact, we are witnessing an arm wrestling between the United States, which doesn't care much as it says, well, I block. Europe does not have products that arrive, 20% of the products that come out of there. But look, if I block you here, it's not said that you can't buy, for example, from others, or, for example, come to buy in the United States. It's a bit expensive, yes, but actually I can sell you many things. So it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? It would be laughable if it weren't so sad, because in these hours another big development has emerged concerning the management of the energy emergency in Europe. And so we started hearing all sorts of things, right? The first one we heard, well, it says people have to work from home once a week. Okay. The second, which is quite worrying and much, much more serious, is the one that says where there are electronic meters that we can control remotely and from afar, wait a moment, while we reduce the number of kilowatts you can consume from your meter, from the grid at certain times, so that we induce you to perform different functions, run the dishwasher, run the washing machine when we decide. Well, we saw during the pandemic period the disaster that happened, and we saw the organized madness, but above all, we saw the management. We have seen an emergency management that unfortunately is typical. In emergency situations, we have now tested two things: that everyone decides what they want, imposes it on us, and goes over our heads, but above all, costs are imposed, revolutions are imposed. No, let's remember in Italy, the wheel deaths, right? So dear to the friends of the Five-Star Movement, right? And to those who remained from the old Five-Star Movement, well, there it was paid for, and then no one paid anymore. They were thrown away, and the Italians were the only ones who had to bear this expense. So then we are seeing the scandal of the masks that were there, masks that were not suitable but were bought in abundance, and now we will see what will happen, and especially who took percentages on these volumes of masks. Let's hope we can get there. So all this kind of discussion that is coming up with yet another emergency, because in emergencies, something else happens that is very unacceptable. It happens that since there is an emergency, I do not issue a call for tenders. I don't hold a competition. I don't hold one because there's an emergency. I decide to assign certain roles to a certain company, to certain people, paying them, as I say, So there's no negotiation. They say, I pay you this way because I can't. So yes, it's expensive, but oh well, there's an emergency, so I can't do anything different. And so we have a situation that is not serious. We have an extremely serious situation. And this discussion is happening all over Europe. Right now, we have a European directive that is preparing to impose what is the energy management discourse of the country. But at the same time, there is also another thing that would be laughable if it weren't tragic. There are different countries proceeding with the purchase of oil, petroleum, gas, and so on, each individually. So you have the Germans offering 110, the Italians saying, no, wait, I want it for 120, the French saying, no, let's make it 130. And then 130 is assigned, and that is the market price. So if we don't manage to have a common platform for European nations to buy a volume of oil, petroleum, gas at the best price and stop competing with each other, well, we won't get anywhere. But we are indeed seeing everything that is clearly the European disaster in these hours. We have seen that the European disaster has been in the economy. We have seen that it was the European disaster regarding energy. We have seen that it was the European disaster regarding the rules. That is, we have had theories of big theories, green theory, the ozone hole, and all these things. And these people practically came to impose on us saying, but your house is not insulated, it's not good. So look, first of all, it's worth much, much less. And then it's not certain that if I get angry, you can't sell that house anymore because it's not up to code. That house either needs to be demolished or brought up to standard or this. So we are reaching this kind of madness.
And above all, another thing that is not talked about, the exploitation of the resources that already exist is not discussed.
In Italy, for example, if there wasn't this demonization, and now it seems that the plants, thank God, that haven't been eliminated, the coal ones, which are there idle but can function, well, they can be reused in a state of emergency. Well, a basic calculation was made on the coal resources in Italy, and we would have about 88 years of reserves for the consumption at that time without having to buy coal elsewhere, and we could have work for Italians for this production.
Here we have arrived, I think we have arrived at the point.
We have reached the point where the first thing that needs to be clear is that if there is no energy autonomy, there is no sovereignty of the country, and it is a country essentially under blackmail and with all the worst possibilities. And so one must absolutely not give up on the matter of one's own autonomy, whether it is autonomy that comes from different sources without any exclusions, including nuclear. And then there is the need to start protecting it. They say there is this Europe must work. Well, we want to see it work, because until today, this Europe has been an enormous ball and chain. It has been a meat grinder regarding the Italian industry, regarding Italian agriculture, and regarding all those that were fishing, not to mention the beaches, not to mention these things. Here in Brussels, we had those who set out to destroy individual countries, some a little less, some a little more, some more favored, and so on. And so today, what are we waiting for? And we are waiting to understand what will happen. What will happen in Iran? We are waiting to see if the situation will conclude in some way. And we are, for now, we acknowledge that one of the big European companies, German, which is Lufthansa, has canceled 20,000 flights. And at the same time, be aware that in case of a flight cancellation, there was a provision for compensation, but all compensations have been abolished due to a state of necessity related to oil, kerosene issues. Here, this is a bit of the situation. So what should we do? Well, we are to use a joke, on alert. But today there's no need to be on alert, like when there was Tachi Pirina on alert. Nowadays, there is a need to be responsible and ready when necessary to be able to protest in the proper ways correctly in a non-violent, civil, and democratic manner. Thank you for your attention and have a good afternoon.